All right, then moving on, we're on part 9 of Feminism, Satan's Plan to Destroy Your Family. If you'd like to follow along, you can go to creationliberty.com, type in feminism, Feminism, into the search bar there, and you will find that article, so called. If you're listening while this is being recorded, I will have like a banner at the top of the page. You can click on that, and you want to click on, there's a content section that has kind of like, there's sections, but they're kind of like chapters, right? You want to click on the one that says the illusion of rape culture, or if you're listening by YouTube, you should be able to click the link in the description, and that should take you roughly to where we are. You'll have to scroll down to join us. So last week we got done talking about how there are real rape cultures out in the world, of where there are, for example, African women in certain areas of Africa that 40% of them will be raped in their lifetime, and that's insane numbers. But that's a rape culture, and we do not have that in the United States, despite what all these feminists want to whine and cry about. The statistics simply do not show this. Now, I mentioned early, or at least last week, that I quoted from a feminist who said that rape is as an American as apple pie. That same feminist, Jessica Valenti, participated in a debate against another woman named Wendy McElroy. And Wendy McElroy, even though, now I will tell you up front, she's a feminist, okay? However, she's a feminist that has tried to reveal some of the truths behind what feminism is actually doing, okay? And the error that they're taking in these statistics. So I can give her credit for that. However, she is still a feminist. She still has a God-hating, wicked philosophy that she upholds, and there's some problems in what she's saying. However, I do want to quote some of what she gave an opening to her presentation. I wanted to quote some of this because I thought it was interesting, so we can see some more evidence of how feminists are not really looking at any facts whatsoever and are even making them up. McElroy says, quote, "There are parts of Afghanistan, for example, where women are murdered for men's honor, they are raped, and when they are raped, they are arrested for it, and they are shunned by their family afterward." Now that I can actually say from personal testimony. I've seen news articles and some other videos of news reports in which they've actually found women, this happened to women in Middle Eastern countries like that, to where, especially in Muslim nations, there was one of the reports I remember, a woman was caught on her way home. She was raped, she was gang raped by, I forget if it was something like 9 or 10 men, right? She reported it. She was first of all rebuked by her husband for being in an area which he did not approve of, and then she was arrested and sentenced. I forget what her sentencing was, but I think one of them was that she was beaten, she was whipped, for her not being in the right place. The guys who raped her, nothing happened to them. It was all considered her fault. See, that is a rape culture. We do not have that happening in America. That doesn't happen here. As McElroy continues to say, now that's a rape culture. But that is not North America. It doesn't resemble North America. Here, rape is a crime that is severely punished. Even the accusation of sexual harassment can ruin someone's career and their lives. And she's right there, and we're going to see a lot of very sad examples of that in a little bit. She continues to say, the message is sent to men today is not that it's okay to rape, it's the opposite, and according to the Department of Justice, rape and sexual assault have decreased by more than half since 1993. So why aren't we celebrating? North America is not a rape culture, and it is an insult to women who live in one that women here, with so much freedom and so much opportunity, are trying to share the same status with them. Now you'll notice she didn't use the word so much privilege, because again, she's a feminist, right? She just claims she's a higher quality feminist, but she's still a feminist, right? She doesn't realize how privileged she is as well. So she continues to say, I often hear statistics meant to prove to me that things are far, far worse for women here than I'm making out. But there are problems with the statistics used to support a rape culture. Many researchers have tried to find out where they come from and what they're based on, and it is an incredibly hard task. For example, a recently circulated claim is that 8% of college men have either attempted or successfully raped, and I'll be dwelling on this stat for a reason. Some associates and I have tried to track it down, and it's typical of what happens over and over again when people try to track down these stats and find out where are they based and what are they rooted in. A key reason why I find no evidence for systematic rape culture, only evidence of rapes committed by individuals, is because the data doesn't exist. We trace the figure back to a book called Body Wars by the clinical psychologist Margot Main. Quote, and this is what her saying this is quote unquote, she's talking about Margot Main here, 8% of college men have attempted or successfully raped. 30% say they would rape if they could get away with it. When the wording was changed to force a woman to have sex, the number jumped to 58%. Worse still, 83.5% argued that some women look like they are just asking to be raped. And that's where she ends the quote from Margot Main. That is just not possible. I have known many men in my lifetime. That number is just not possible. And McElroy continues to say, I stumbled when I first read the 83.5% figure because it seemed improbable to me that a scientifically based study first of all would ask that question. Now stop right there, because she's right. A scientifically based study. Could you imagine them on a survey asking, hey, do you know women that just look like they want to be raped? That's not a scientific question, number one, because what's the purpose of that question? What are you trying to fish for here? I mean, it doesn't actually get any kind of scientific analysis for anything. So she said, it seemed improbable to me that a scientifically based study, first of all, would ask that question, and second of all, that would be the result. You're telling me that at least 6 out of 7 men just see women around them all the time that look like they need to be raped. I'm telling you, that is not the case. At least not in America. Maybe there is some other country where that's the case, but not in the United States. So McElroy continues and says, and again, I'm a woman who's known an unusual amount of violence. Now, in her defense, she does describe the story of her growing up as a teenager, and she was abused a lot. She was beaten and raped many times because of the environment she was involved in. And that's a sad situation. I think she's blind in one eye because of the kind of abuse she took. So she's somebody who's experienced quite a bit of violence. And he said, Chris, didn't you say earlier that she was privileged? Absolutely. Just because she's among criminals and thieves at a time in her life does not mean she's not privileged. She's absolutely privileged. Okay. So, continuing here, she says, I'm a woman who's known an unusual amount of violence. I'm hardly naive on the subject. When the National Post, which is a major Canadian paper, decided to follow up on the questions we were raising about the stats in Main's book, a reporter contacted her. She was largely unable to give her sources. Oh, what a coincidence! A feminist not able to give sources or provide any sources? They just kind of make things up? Yeah, this happens all the time. She continues to say, there was one study she reported, and to quote the book again, and here she's quoting Margot Main, in one study over half of high school boys and nearly half of the girls stated that rape was acceptable if the male was sexually aroused, and she ends the quote from Margot Main. You're trying to tell me that half of young men and women think rape's okay? Where? Because that has never existed in any group I have ever been in growing up. Ever. I have never even met one person who has ever said to me that they thought that rape was okay. I mean, every time I've talked about it, even in interviews with, like if I had live interview atheists I had on a podcast show or something, every time I asked them if they thought rape was acceptable, they said no. These were men I'm talking to. I've never heard anybody even make that claim. Nor even have I heard of any men who have even thought that would be sexually pleasing to them to do such a thing. So McElroy continues to say no one, including Margot Main, was able to come up with that study. No one has found it yet. When pressed, Maine emailed the National Post, basically saying she didn't know where it came from, she didn't know why it hadn't been cited, and she was too busy to bother. Well, I'm too busy to bother giving it credibility. End quote. So I just wanted to show you from a feminist testimony that even there are very, very, very rare some feminists that will come out and say these statistics that feminists are yelling all the time don't even exist. And if McElroy would come to repentance in front of the Lord God and actually acknowledge the truth, she would relinquish being a feminist altogether. So she's still trying to keep her, keep one foot on both sides. That's not going to work. So notice what she said, though. Now, in her defense, first of all, I want to say this. If you listen to her entire talk, I have a video on the website you can go look at if you want. If you listen to her entire talk, she does give an example of one man, and I'll tell you what the example was. It was something that was big in the news about it was some guy who had landed a probe on a comet. Okay? Now, first of all, everybody says, oh, this is a monumental thing. I'm thinking, I don't care. Is it cool? Yeah, it's cool. Is it worth the millions of dollars that have been invested into doing something like that? I mean, what exactly is that going to do? Think about it. Does it feed the hungry? Does it reveal the truth of all the lies we're being spread around down here? Does it help our economic situation? No. It doesn't do anything. The only thing I would be curious to notice if they were to test the ice on the comets and test whether it was freshwater or saltwater, I would kind of be interested to know that. But that's a whole different issue. Whether I'm interested to know something doesn't mean it's a monumental thing. However, the world considered it monumental. They thought this was a grand thing. And so what happened was on a news program where they were interviewing him, he wore a shirt. Now, the shirt had very scantily clad anime females drawn all over it. It was actually made for him by a female friend from his college or something like that, right? She was an artist and she made it for him, and he wore the shirt on a television interview. Not the smartest thing in the world, but that's what happened. The feminists ignored his accomplishment and simply focused in on complaining about his shirt. That was it. Okay, so this is now, first of all, is that petty? Well, it was stupid for him to wear the shirt, and it was petty of all the feminists, right? Obviously, everybody's just doing dumb things, right? However, McElroy, that's the example she gave to say that feminism saying that this is a rape culture, how it's affecting men. That's pathetic. That is a pathetic example for McElroy to give to back that up. But again, she's a feminist, so she can't give all the details, right? Otherwise, she has no reason to be a feminist. So let me demonstrate my point of giving examples about men. You see, because the statement earlier that she made that, well, it's an insult to women in a real rape culture, that, you're insulting these women to claim that you're in a rape culture when you're not. And I agree with the statement. I even made it myself. However, the women in a rape culture are being indirectly affected. It's an indirect slap in the face to them. But there's a direct slap in the face to men. There's a direct attack on men when feminists are doing this. And it's the men that are getting ignored. That's why all the time in the media you'll hear say, well, it's an insult to women because, well, it's always focused on women. The men are ignored because of male privilege, obviously, right? So I want to go over the story very briefly of Brian Banks. I say briefly because there's a lot more details we're skipping in the story, but I'm going to give you a basic overview. This is from an article from the New York Daily News from January 2016. It says, quote, Brian Banks was 16 years old in the summer of 2002. A 6'2", 220-pound linebacker with speed at Powerhouse Long Beach Polytechnic High in Southern California. As promising a football player as any high school kid in the country, as one of the most highly recruited middle linebackers in the nation, he had a verbal commitment to play on full scholarship for Pete Carroll at USC. What could be better than that? I would go to these football camps and just dominate, Banks said. I had my own mailbox at school because I was getting so many recruiting letters. In 2002, he was taking summer classes at his high school and left the classroom for what was supposed to be a quick call to a documentary crew preparing a feature on the rivalry with De La Salle High School in Northern California. I stepped outside to make a phone call, and I ran into a classmate of mine, Banks said. Her name was Juanita Gibson. She was a friend. She was 15. We met, hugged, started talking, and agreed to go to an area on our campus that was known as a makeout area. Now, when they say makeout, that means they're kissing and all that, right? I'm not encouraging Christians to get... I don't know how I feel about that kind of stuff, but, the Bible says it's better not to touch a woman at all, unless you're married to her. So I don't even think the kissing stuff is something that young Christian men and women ought to be getting into. So I guess I really haven't thought about or wrote about something like that very much, but I would stay away from it unless I'm missing some scripture somewhere. It probably shouldn't be done, because all that does is it leads into other things. So unless you're married to her, don't get involved in doing stuff like that, all right? And if you're starting to get involved in doing stuff like that, well, maybe you ought to marry her, okay? And then you got nothing to worry about. The point is, if you marry the woman, you don't have to worry about it, right? So anyway, they went to this makeout area, Banks said. We went to this area and made out. We never had sex. By the end of the day, Banks was in custody, accused of raping Gibson on the school's campus. But we never had sex, Banks pleaded. Nobody believed him. I was being arrested and accused of kidnapping and rape, he says. I was taken into custody that same day, and the judge put a bail on me that was too high for me to post bond. It was over $1 million. For a 16-year-old, I just want to remind you, okay? The article says he languished in juvenile hall for an entire year before his case came up. He was to be tried as an adult, and if found guilty, faced 41 years to life. His football dreams effectively died that summer day in the stairwell of his school, end quote. I mean, the problem is that he sat for so long in a juvenile hall, because he sat in juvenile hall for over a year. He sat in there so long, the court said, oh, we're going to try you as an adult, even though it wasn't an adult crime, and even though there was no evidence. None. There was no evidence presented. It was her word. That's it. $1 million bail on no evidence, sat in juvenile hall before he was sentenced to 41 years to life. On what grounds? One woman made a claim. That's it. A woman's word, and his life is destroyed because male privilege. The article continues to say, quote, Banks was offered a deal to plead guilty to one count of rape under the condition that the other charges would be dropped. He would then undergo a 90-day observation at Chino State Prison and would be interviewed and evaluated by psychologists and counselors who would determine on a ladder system whether I would receive probation or 3 or 6 years prison, Banks said. I was promised and guaranteed... Now, before I continue, actually, I should make mention, when I said 41 years to life, that was the original sentence he was being threatened with. It wasn't what he was actually sentenced later, but he was being threatened with 41 years to life. Banks says, I was promised and guaranteed by my attorney that I would get probation if I took the plea. And I was also told that if I didn't take it, I would more than likely be found guilty and receive life in prison. He was 17 years old. I mean, this is another issue I want to bring up for Christians. If somebody has falsely accused you of something, and you're being asked to take a plea bargain to admit guilt when you didn't do it, you have to understand that if you take that plea bargain, you're lying. If you didn't do it, you didn't do it. And so you're supposed to tell the truth. Okay? These plea bargains that they give to people is to try to save the court's time and money. That's what it's all about. But you're supposed to tell the truth. So Banks continues, do I plead to a crime that I did not commit or receive a small sentence, or do I roll the dice, risk my entire life behind bars for a crime I didn't commit? he says. I realized that day, regardless of whatever my decision was, neither one of them was going home an innocent man. All he could think about was getting his life back, going home, playing football, finishing his high school education, enrolling at USC. They put him in a room and gave him 10 minutes to make a decision. He sat there crying. I was unable to speak to my mom. I was denied that right, he says. 16-year-old in juvenile hall for a year, gave him 10 minutes to make a decision that would alter his entire life, and he wasn't even allowed to speak to his mom. He underwent the 90-day observation. The psychologist and counselor recommended probation. The judge, instead, gave him 6 years. He had never been in trouble before, not even a speeding ticket. Banks lost 10 years of his life, a frightful 5 years and 2 months in prison, followed by 5 years of high custody parole. End quote. Well, now here's the question. Did he do it? Because we have to pose the question, it is possible she may not have been lying. But it turns out that even though he was sentenced and thrown in jail and had his life destroyed and spent 10 years in punishment, the oh-so-innocent female, Juanita Gibson, lied. So when Banks came home from prison, his high custody parole he was doing, he checked his Facebook account and saw a friend request from none other than Juanita Gibson. That's right. The woman who accused him of rape, he got a friend request from her on Facebook. And she said she wanted to, quote, let bygones be bygones, end quote, and offered to, quote, hook up, end quote. Now, if you don't know what the term hook up means, that would be what a typical American would do on a date. Wait a second. He was supposed to be her rapist, and as soon as he gets out of prison, she wants to go on a date with him? Doesn't that seem a little strange for a rape victim to develop that kind of a relationship with her rapist? So Banks saw an opportunity to hire a private investigator and get a confession from her about lying. Now listen to this, continuing the article, quote, Banks still doesn't know her reasoning for selling him down the river when she knew they never had sex and there was no DNA trace on her underwear. That's right, no DNA traces whatsoever, there was no evidence for this, and he still has not gotten a clear answer from her. But when we get, I'm about to read to you some of the details of this case, you might start to get a little bit of an idea of what's really going on. The article continues to say maybe it was the $1.5 million she collected from the Long Beach school system, claiming it was an unsafe environment. The city is trying to recoup $2.6 million from her now, which they have so far failed to do, because after all, she's a woman, she's innocent, right? Banks thinks maybe Gibson was afraid her older sister, who went to the same high school, would find out she made out with him and tell her mother, or that he would brag to friends. Maybe she thought he would just be suspended. He doesn't think she was trying to put him in jail. But before we go on here, even though she didn't think it would destroy his life, look at the reasons. Money, to get money, right? To get attention, to protect herself from reprisal from either classmates or family. I want you to remember those because we're going to see that pop up time and time again as we read through some of these examples. These girls are being taught and have some sort of attitude that thinks that so they will not have to suffer social embarrassment. Social embarrassment is such a grand, ultimate punishment in this world. So they won't have to suffer it. It's better for a man to have his life destroyed and spend 20 years in prison. That's a fair trade. This is the reality. Okay? So, Banks continues, he says, we don't really know what the truth really is as to why she lied, he said. I never really got a clear reason. I mean, you think if you put the guy in prison for 10 years... you just tell him the truth. Isn't that insane for you to just say, here's what was really going on? Just for his benefit to know. Is that not enough to drive you insane? I mean, normally I don't like to get like that, but that makes me want to pull my hair out that she can't even tell him the truth.
She's probably ashamed, and she should be.
Lorraine, we know she's ashamed, or she would have told him the truth. Anyway, the article continues and says, he invited Juanita Gibson to the investigator's office. They spoke with the investigator monitoring in another room. Banks wanted her to understand what she did to his life. Now notice, she's agreeing to come in and be monitored by a private investigator. She agreed to this. He asked her to come back the second day and speak to the investigator. Did he rape you? Did he kidnap you? So she agreed to talk with him while being monitored. She agreed to come back and talk with the investigator one-on-one. He asked her these questions. Did he rape you? Did he kidnap you? The investigator asked. Banks said she laughed it off and said, of course not. If he raped me, I wouldn't be here right now. We were just young and having a good time, being curious. Then all these other people got involved and blew it out of proportion. It was all on tape. Banks took it to the California Innocence Project, which I've heard has helped a lot of innocent people get cleared, which took his case and appealed it. 1 year later, 3 months before he was to come off parole, Banks was cleared. On May 24th, 2012, the same Los Angeles Superior Court judge who had sentenced Banks to 6 years in prison, when he begrudgingly accepted a plea bargain for a crime he did not commit after he was led to believe he would get a probation, took less than 1 minute to dismiss his conviction, end quote. Sentenced him to 6 years in prison on no evidence whatsoever and took less than 60 seconds to dismiss it, once the evidence of his innocence was proven. Because for women, they are innocent until proven guilty, which is what the American Constitution set up for us in our government. But for men, you're guilty until proven innocent because male privilege. I mean, she lied and not only destroyed a man's life, but she collected $1.5 million from the school on her word against his. Now you tell me, all these feminists, they talk about, oh, men are the ones who have all the power. We women don't have any power. Who had the power in that situation? Who had the power? Was it Banks, the man who collected all that money and got away scot-free? Or is it the woman who gave her word, she lied and got all this money and all this attention and all this help? Who had the power? You tell me. Proverbs 26:28 says, a lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it. If you lie about someone, and I encourage people, go to the article we have at creationliberty.com. There's a search bar, just type in the word lies, L-I-E-S. There's an article called God Does Not Justify Lies, and read through that. The Bible specifically says that a lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it. If you lie about someone and they are afflicted, afflicted means grieved. If they have to suffer because of your lie, the Bible says you hate that person. That's why I gave the example concerning all the Christmas paganism that all these Christians are doing out there. So-called Christians, a lot of churchgoers are doing all their paganism, right? And they don't care one way or another that what they're doing is wrong in the eyes of God. But when they're doing that and they're lying to them about Santa Claus, and the child figures out that Santa Claus is not real, and they get upset about it, the Bible says those parents hate their children. I don't care what the parent says. No, I love my child very much. I don't care what you say because God says otherwise. He says you hate him. The Bible also tells us that he that hateth his brother is a murderer at heart. That means when you lie and they're afflicted by it, the Bible says, if you look at precept upon precept, line upon line, like how we're supposed to read the Bible in Isaiah 28:10, which tells us that's how we're supposed to read the Bible. God is actually telling us that it is the equivalent of murder when you do that. And hopefully now, when we see these kind of lies, you can see why that is. It's the equivalent of killing someone when you bear false witness. In the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not bear false witness. That's what that talks about. Now, of course, the feminists are going to come back and say there are very few cases that women ever lie about such things. I mean, again, because women can do no wrong, right? They're perfect in all their ways. That's the examples we're being given, as I talked about in the very first part of this teaching. For example, feminist man-hater Donna Zuckerberg, in an article she wrote that's called He Said, She Said, The Mythical History of the False Rape Allegation. Now, what does she mean by that? By the way, her website's called Jezebel.com. I'm not kidding. Now, the mythical history, she's saying that false rape allegation's a myth. And that this situation, if I talked about the situation with Brian Banks, that's just a rare, isolated case. Women don't lie about rape. And she said on her blog post she made, quote, "The most commonly accepted statistic is that 2 to 8% of rape allegations are false," end quote. Now, this is absurd for many reasons. First of all, the report Donna Zuckerberg had referred to was published by Idaho.gov. I went and took a look at it. It stated that their statistics showed 2 to 10%, not 2 to 8%. So where was she getting 8? I have no idea, because they showed 2 to 10%, which was based on a limited study of 136 cases. That's it. Which means she didn't even have her numbers correct from the report, number one. Number two, I want to point out that 2 to 10% is a 500% margin of error on the part of the study. How reliable do you think that study is that has a 500% margin of error for their conclusions? Something wasn't done right there. Now, on her website, there's some commenters on her blog that they started complaining about her numbers, saying that she got them wrong. And I agreed, because I found that out pretty quickly the same. I just wanted to see what some of the commenters were saying. And they said, look, you're seriously wrong about what you're stating here. Here's what Zuckerberg then said, quote, "To be clear, I didn't mean to endorse this statistic as a fact." Wait a second. When you quote from a state like an Idaho state, right? When you're quoting from a state statistical study that was done, and then you said these are commonly accepted statistics, she says, well, I didn't mean to endorse it as it was a fact. Yes, you did, you liar. That's exactly what you did. You are a liar. And she continues to say, although I see now that the paragraph break makes it look that way. What do you mean the paragraph? The sentence you stated made it that way, not a paragraph break. Folks, she's trying to save face because she wants to keep her bloggers, right? She's got to keep that attention so that way she can keep getting her funding. And then she finishes by saying, I don't know if it's right, end quote. She doesn't even know if it's right or not. But because the 2 to 8% makes her argument look good, she puts it down. She doesn't know if it's right. She hasn't investigated it. She didn't even read it properly. She just threw it in there because it made her sound good. Welcome to feminism. Don't think this is uncommon. This happens all the time with feminists. I have read so many things from feminists and watched so many things from feminists that have made these claims, and there is nothing to back them up. Nothing. So what's worse is that most feminists, after they've, they spread this number around, then other feminists read it and say, oh, wow, this must be true because they're a highly respected feminist, so they take that number and they spread it around. And when they do, they all opt for the lowest integer. So you have a 500% margin of error. Well, we're going to go with the 2% because it sounds better. So the common claim is that only 2% of rape allegations are false. And then the feminists will say, Chris, you're insane because we do back up these things with proper statistics. And so what they'll do is they'll go and quote from a 1996 FBI report that says the following, quote, as with all other crime index offenses, complaints of forcible rape made to law enforcement agencies are sometimes found to be false or baseless. In such cases, law enforcement agencies unfound the offenses. Again, they unfound the offenses and exclude them from crime counts. The unfounded rate or percentage of complaints determined through investigation to be false is higher for forcible rape than any other index crime. 8% of forcible rape complaints in 1996 were unfounded, while the average for all index crimes was 2%, end quote. Now, of course, the FBI says, well, we don't include those in crime counts. Not true, as we're about to see. That tricky word, unfounded, is what we need to understand. The End Violence Against Women International group put out a bulletin, and they explained to readers the difference between unfounded and false. Here's what they said in their bulletin, which is titled Unfounding, False versus Baseless Reports. Quote, according to UCR, that's the Unfounded Crime Reports Guidelines, a report offense can be cleared as unfounded if the investigation shows that no offense occurred nor was attempted. These unfounded cases thus remain as official crime reports and are included in the departmental statistics on sexual assault crimes that are reported to the UCR. Wait a second, what did that say? If the investigation shows that no offense occurred or was attempted, they still remain in the departmental statistics as a sexual assault crime. It's still listed as a rape. The quote continues to say the USCR guidelines are clear that a report can only be determined to be false on the basis of evidence that the crime was not committed or attempted, end quote. What did they just say? The only way we can make a false rape allegation, make sure that there's a false rape allegation, is if there is evidence presented that makes the man innocent. If there's something evidence presented like a video camera or something that proves his innocence, then we'll strike it from the record. But if there's no evidence, even if there's no evidence of the crime committed at all, like she could have lied about it, it's still counted as a rape statistic. So you wonder why these are so low when they're counting so many of them that aren't rapes at all. See, this is the way it works in the United States right now, in our supposed rape culture, right? That means if no evidence is presented that a rape has occurred, none, it's still counted in the numbers as a rape. Or in other words, a man will have a rape connected to his personal record by her claim alone until he proves evidence. He's got to provide evidence that he didn't do it. All a woman has to do is say, he's a rapist, a crime of rape goes on his record that he didn't actually commit, and he has to try to clear his name. Where is the male privilege? Certainly it can't be female privilege that allows that to happen, because that can't exist. After all, feminists told us there's just male privilege everywhere. Again, feminists don't care if the numbers are true or not, as long as the number reads the way that makes their feminist propaganda look good. They will continue their hateful crusade to destroy men by screaming at the top of their lungs through all these bullhorns, right? In 1993, Newsweek reported, now this was back in 1993, that was about 25 years ago. I don't even know what the numbers are today. But this was back in the late 80s and early 90s when they first started to go back and do routine DNA tests on all of previous cases. Because in the mid-80s, early mid-80s, DNA testing still wasn't readily done, nor was it readily trusted in. And on top of that, like court systems, there was a lot of investigators, they couldn't afford to do it because it was so expensive at the time. But then when it became more and more readily available, more and more common, there were more and more people going to colleges to learn how to do it, then it became readily available, and now people started to go back and reinvestigate closed cases where somebody was sitting in jail for a crime, and Newsweek reported, quote, a third of the DNA scans now routinely done in new rape investigations are non-matches, end quote. So they're doing new rape investigations on what somebody is being accused of being raped, and then they go back and open old cases as well and find out, and they're finding out so far that a third of the ones they've tested so far have found out to be false, that the woman lied. Well, she either lied or she was mistaken. Okay? This is 1 in 3. Now, if you have a problem with 1 in 3 women lying, should you not, if we're supposed to be a society that's innocent until proven guilty, assume that when a woman comes in and reports a rape, that she could be lying? Actually, it's not a bad method. It's okay to listen to them and to take down notes and get all the information and the evidence together, but you ought to have in the back of your mind that this woman could be lying. Yet that's not typically how it's done in a lot of instances. Okay? There are some good police officers here and there that do what's right. Okay? But there's so much feminist influence that it's almost just ruled out that women could possibly lie. But 1 in 3 is insane for crime statistics. These women are lying. And these, thankfully, these innocent men are being exonerated after spending many years in prison for something they didn't do. Now, the reason I say they might be mistaken about who they're identifying as the rapist is because they can bring in a lineup, and the woman can actually pick out the wrong attacker. And that's happened. There are cases in which that's happened. Now, I don't focus on this too much because, as I talked about previously, I think in the last part that we did, in part 8, that most rapes are not, the guy in all the black stockings and he's hiding in the bushes and jumps out at someone. Most rapes are committed by people that the assailant and the victim know each other. Okay, and they're usually out doing things in leisurely activities most of the time. And that's so I have to include mistaken, but that kind of thing actually happens more rarely. Usually it's that she lies. That's the problem. And I do want to point out that this is not something new. I don't want people to think this has just come about because of feminism. No, this kind of thing has been going on for thousands of years about women lying. And the case in point will be the Bible. The Bible actually explains this when we look at Joseph, who at one point was put in charge of all the property of his master's house, and the master's wife tried to lure him in to sleep with her, but Joseph refused her repeated advances. So if you go back to Genesis chapter 39, starting in verse 9, it says, "There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee," he's talking to this woman, "because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie by her, or to be with her. And that's a wise thing to do. Men, if you get lured into a trap from a woman like that, and she gets you in that position, here's the problem. She can then blackmail you to continue to do that deed as often as she wants. Because all she's got to do is claim that you raped her, and she can destroy your life. And there will be no evidence to actually stop it, you see. Then she tried to trap him. Okay, here's what the woman tried to do next. In Genesis 39, starting in verse 11. It says, "And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within." No eyewitnesses, no evidence. Remember that, okay? "And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out." Now, there are so many, cartoon drawings of Joseph running out of the house naked. That is not what happened, okay? The Jews would wear an outer coat. It was actually stylish for the most part. That's the way that they dressed, okay? That's what he left behind. He didn't get naked and run out of the house. That's ridiculous, okay? That's not the way it happened, but, that's the way they portray it in cartoon-like fashion. Anyway, continuing in verse 13, "And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand," look, she has evidence now, right, that she can use to back up her claim, "and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice." Right? "And it came to pass, that when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and got him out." She lied. She's the girl who cried rape, right? She lied. And she said the same thing to her husband, too, when he got home. Verse 16, "And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home, And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. Now, before jumping to conclusions, I want to point out very specifically that the Bible only says the master's wrath was kindled. That means ignited, okay? After hearing his wife's words, but it doesn't say who his wrath was kindled against. I have very long suspected after reading this that his anger was actually against his wife, not against Joseph, because he liked Joseph, he favored him, and he knew Joseph was an honest man. So he was angry at his wife. Why? Because his wife was very strategic. Now notice the order in which she did things. Did she take this directly to her husband? No. She gathered all the men, and she went out to all them around there. So she went to the public at large and told them what happened, and then told the husband, and so now what does the husband do? Because if all the people who knew about this find out, wow, his wife was raped, and he didn't do anything about it. See, the social pressure is now put on him that he has to punish Joseph because of her lying words. I think it's the fact that he didn't believe her, but all the public now believed her. And so he had to do something. He didn't even have a choice in the matter. And you're going to see this kind of thing happens more often than you think. And it's been happening for thousands of years. For thousands of years, all these feminists have said, for thousands of years, women have not had privilege. What are you talking about? Women have had so much privilege in most societies throughout the world. So, in 1994, Dr. Eugene Cannon published a study of a small community with a population of 70,000 people between the years of 1978 and 1987. So over the course of almost 10 years, he studied a population of 70,000 people in a town, and he found 109 reported cases of rape. Out of 10 years, 70,000 people, 10 years, 109 reported cases. Out of those reports, 45 of them, that's 41%, were false reports in which the woman lied about an innocent man. So I want you to understand that almost half of a 10-year span of rape cases they had in an entire community, almost half were women lying. From these false rape allegation study that he did, it says, quote, "These false allegations appear to serve three major functions for the complainants." Now I want you to pay close attention to these, okay? Three major functions. Providing an alibi. What does that mean? Well, she wants to make sure that she can say she was somewhere where she wasn't. She wants to lie about where she was. Okay? Number two, he said, seeking revenge. Well, he did something wrong to me, like he dated me for a while, but he dumped me, so now I want to get revenge on him and say that he raped me. That's the other one. And the third one he mentions, he says, and obtaining sympathy and attention. Well, nobody's paying attention to me, so if I say I'm a rape victim, everybody will feel sorry for me and give me lots of attention. So that's what he's saying, that the three major reasons he found for these. And the reason I want you to pay attention to those is because we're going to see that happening as we go through some of these examples. False rape allegations are not the consequence of a gender-linked aberration. He said aberration is an unwelcome departure from the norm. So he's saying that the false rape allegations, when they're lying, he's saying these are not just like a small random phenomenon that's just departing from the norm because all women tell the truth. That's not what he's saying. Which he continues to say, as frequently claimed, but reflect impulsive and desperate efforts to cope with personal and social stress situations, end quote. And that's exactly what I was saying earlier, is that women are lying to save themselves from any kind of social embarrassment, because any kind of social pressure, personal embarrassment or social embarrassment she would have to suffer is far too grievous for her to suffer. It's better for a man's life, career, marriage, and to be destroyed and him be put in jail and him to have to suffer the consequences of being homeless and things like that when he comes out of it. It's better for an innocent man to have to suffer all that than for a woman to have to take the grievous position of suffering any social embarrassment from the consequences of her actions. Right? Sure, that's fair. Doesn't that sound fair to everybody else? I'm being very sarcastic here because it takes a lot for me to read this without so much anger in my voice, because this kind of stuff makes me angry. This kind of stuff makes the Lord God angry. God said that in Proverbs chapter 6 that he hates lies above all things, and certainly this should be a primary example to help show you why God hates lies so much. So again, what are the feminists claiming? They're claiming that 2% of rape cases are where women are lying. But I have found countless, and I mean countless, to the point that I had to pick and choose, okay? Some of these examples. Now, if you want to know more details and get more examples and know more details about these different examples, I have done a lot of updates in the book, okay? Because one of these, I was giving some examples off of one of these compilation videos I had found, some reports. If I go into the book, I actually give all the references of where the actual local reports were given, and I give more quotation on that stuff so you can see more details. You can get enough information from this, but if you want to get the book when we're done with it, it's not out yet, but when we're done with it, you can get that and read more about it if you like. So I watched this YouTube video. Now, unfortunately, the YouTube video, I think the channel closed. There must have been some copyright issue or something like that, but they closed the channel down, so the video doesn't actually exist anymore. But they showed news reports, and these are real news reports, okay? And I'm going to quote you what the news reports were saying. The first report said, quote, "It was the middle of the day back on February 19th, 2016, when Cassandra Tucker called police to say she had been robbed and sexually assaulted by someone impersonating a police officer. Tucker said the suspect was driving an unmarked Crown Victoria and had red and blue flashing lights in the dash. The victim alleged she had been violated in several ways, and so police took her to the emergency room to complete a rape kit." Now, first of all, before we even get into the rest of this report, I want to make mention, when I saw this video, this was happening in kind of a place where there was a lot of houses on a street corner where people live. Don't you think somebody else would have seen the flashing lights and been looking out their windows to see what was going on and would have seen all this go down? Don't you think there would have been some eyewitnesses there? Yeah, there would have been somebody, but that's not... They couldn't find anybody like that, okay? The report continues to say, Tucker also told officers the suspect had stolen $150 cash from her purse, but on the way back from the hospital, Tucker told police she was really trying to buy illegal drugs, that after she had spent her boyfriend's money on something else, she decided to file the false police report, end quote. So what happened? It was to save herself from the embarrassment and shame she was going to have to suffer to go back and tell her boyfriend that she spent the money on something else. So instead of suffering that, she would rather waste taxpayers' time and money and resources, right? With all these police and the hospital and everything else, to waste all these taxpayers' time, money, and resources, and to possibly make someone else suffer a penalty for a crime he didn't commit, so she wouldn't have to suffer personal embarrassment. The second report I saw said, quote, "This police interview with a Fort Collins woman, she was later convicted for making phony rape accusations, and the man she accused was arrested and put in jail 1 year ago today. Tonight he is speaking to 7 News reporter Lindsay Watts about why he is still struggling to pick up the pieces. Accused of rape, cuffed at the police station the day before Thanksgiving, watching it back 1 year later, Dustin Toth says his life still feels out of control. His accuser, Catherine Bennett, a co-worker he'd started dating. This is an exclusive video of her police interview as Toth sat in jail. Her story fell apart. Bennett, later convicted of making it all up, she was sentenced to 35 days in jail, then an ankle monitor and probation. Toth says he's the one who's been punished. The Army National Guardsman lost his civilian job and was out of work for nearly 6 months after the arrest. Toth said, "I feel like I'm incapable to actually trust a woman again. Giving me the opportunity to share it gives me the opportunity to clear my name because I still feel like my name is not cleared." End quote. Now, there's a few things we ought to make mention of here, okay? Number one, he loses his job. He's out of work for 6 months. He can't hardly get work because they're like, "You're a rapist. We're not going to hire you." All on her lie that if he was actually convicted, okay, he was arrested and put in jail for a while, and if he's actually convicted of what he was being accused of, this guy could have been in jail for 10, 20, 30 years. What happens to her? She gets 35 days in jail. That's it. Oh, but they said, but Chris, she got an ankle monitor too. Yeah, that ankle monitor is a lie detector. That's going to keep her from lying, right? What's the point in putting her under house arrest with an ankle monitor when she's a liar? The problem is not her walking in an illegal fashion. The problem is her lying. Now, if you want to put a muzzle on her that has a tracking device on it, okay, I could go with that. That would be fair. I think that would be a little just in the eyes of the victim, the true victim, who was the man who was falsely accused. That might be a little just. Hey, we're going to put a muzzle on her for the next 6 months. You think that would be okay? Just a suggestion, okay? They do it to dogs, and dogs don't even talk. I'm just going on to report number 3. It says, quote, "A man who spent a decade in prison for a crime he didn't do is awarded more than $500,000 under a new Washington law. His name is Thomas Kennedy. He was released from prison 2 years ago after his daughter admitted she lied about being raped. A judge has ordered the state to pay $520,000 under Washington's Wrongful Conviction Compensation Act. Thomas Kennedy tells me the money doesn't even begin to make up for everything he's been through, but he does believe it will help give him a fresh start. Kennedy spent 3,242 days in prison, wrongly convicted of raping his then 11-year-old daughter. His daughter later admitted she made it up. Kennedy says she still hasn't forgiven herself yet for it. That's what I'd like to see her get over." Yes, I realize, look, all men have sinned. All men have fallen short of the glory of God. There is none righteous, no, not one. However, these women saying that all men are just these evil rapists that deserve to be put in prison and shot after he spends 10 years suffering for his daughter's lies, and the one thing he wants her to do is to forgive herself and move on. How wicked and evil these men are, right? The report continues and says after nearly a decade behind bars, he was released from his sentence in 2012, but he says life on the outside has been tough. My job situation has been whatever work I could find wherever I could get it, like the load of trash in the back of my truck today. It makes money. Kennedy plans to invest into his grandson's future. To me, the money is great, and I'm very thankful for that, but more so I'm thankful for the justice system doing what they can, admitting that they did wrong. That, to me, is priceless. End quote. Yeah, so his 11-year-old daughter accused him of raping her. And folks, you ought to ask prisoners what happens to people that are convicted of child rape when they go to prison. I mean, when he says it doesn't make up for everything he's been through, I know exactly what he's talking about. And as we're going to see later, as we go through this teaching, that men are raped more often than women in our society. I highly suspect that is the case, but the proper studies have not even been done on it because, again, who cares about men? Where do we hear about male rape? We don't hear about it in statistical reporting as much as we hear it about from comedians and sitcoms, because male rape, that's just comical. Female, it's tragedy, but male rape is comical because male privilege. But he suffered 10 years in prison on behalf of his daughter lying about it. Now, if you actually go into, if you want to learn more about, a little bit more about it, I do go into some more details in the book that I'm coming out with on the topic. And what ended up happening is that she had resented him for not, because he was working all the time, not spending enough time with her. and she actually had sex with another elementary school boy in her class. She had previously had sex with him. So in order to cover the embarrassment of that, and to get back at her father, she falsely accused him of rape, and then finally 10 years later came out and told the truth that she lied. Why didn't she tell the truth earlier? Well, again, to have to suffer social embarrassment is just too much of a burden. It's better for him just to stay in prison so she doesn't have to suffer that terrible burden of punishment. So again, it's not that he pressed charges. I mean, who is there to press charges against her for lying? No one. She lies and gets away with it. Because male privilege, right? A local news station reported that a female college student arrested for DUI, that's driving under the influence, tried to get out of it by accusing the arresting officer of rape, but he had a hidden vest cam on that saved him from that, and that revealed her lies. There was another news station I saw that reported a 13-year-old girl who claimed in tears over a 911 call that she was raped by a man with a knife. That triggered police officers to pull out all their resources, including a helicopter, to look for the suspect. But it turns out, after picking a man out of a lineup, she confessed to lying, because she finally realized, oh, I'm going to be sentencing this guy to decades in prison. So she confessed to her lie, because she was trying to avoid getting in trouble for being out late with a boy down the street. If my parents find out that I was out late with a boy down the street, they're going to get really angry with me, so I would rather potentially send someone to prison than to have to suffer any kind of punishment or my parents looking down on my actions. And the police officers who were reporting on the situation told the media, they said there was no remorse in her at all. I think she stopped and finally confessed to her lying, but they said she didn't even seem like she was remorseful of it. She was like, well, it's not true, whatever. She doesn't care about all the taxpayers' time, money, and resources she's wasting. She doesn't care about any of the people that she's going to harm in the process of doing this. She doesn't care because she's been given that feminist attitude. She's been taught those feminist lines, because what is feminism? Again, feminism is the outcry of privileged women who don't want to suffer consequences for their actions. They don't want to suffer consequences for their choices, do they? And you're seeing how this is just spreading, and it's plaguing our society. It's already been bad enough over the past few thousand years, as already demonstrated, of women lying about these things. And as we're going to see later in Scripture, as we go through this teaching, the Scripture specifically tells older women to teach younger women not to be false accusers. Why would the Bible point that out specifically for women not to be false accusers? Because women can commonly, when they become discontented, or when they become embarrassed, or they find out they're going to have to suffer some consequence of their actions, will lie. It's so common for them to do that, so easy for them to do that. And I'm not saying there are men that don't lie, don't misunderstand, but we're focusing on the feminism aspect right now. Is that women do commonly lie. I have seen it myself, to get themselves out of embarrassing situations. And so we're going to cover more on this topic, because we've still got a lot more to cover on the rape issue. And as we're going to find some more examples later, we're going to see a psychologist that actually faked her own rape just to get her husband to want to move to a different location because she didn't want to live in the house she was living in. There's others of them that just wanted to save themselves from embarrassment of some fights they got in, so they accused someone of rape. And we'll see examples of girls who falsely accused a boy of rape when they simply didn't like him. We're going to see more examples of this kind of stuff and a lot more on top of this next week. So did anybody have any questions or comments about anything we talked about today before we close? Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, this week, and may the Lord Jesus Christ bless you all as you seek to study His Word and glorify Him in all that you say and do, and God willing, we will see you next week.